In 2012, an unusual scene took place inside a garage and led to the resolution of a police mystery. It all happened when an 18-year-old girl received a special beauty treatment, like makeup, hairstyling, clothing adjustments, and a few other things. Then after all that, they took a photo with that day's newspaper. What was the point? Well, proof of life for the payment of a kidnapping ransom. But as you know, in many cases, things aren't as they seem, are they? Our eyes can deceive us just like the lens of a camera can too. And look, in 2012, it wasn't that easy to digitally manipulate an image like it is today, you know? So it was important for the girl to look presentable. What nobody knew is that that photo was an absolute hoax. Who, how, and why is what we're going to find out in today's episode. I'm Marcos Campos. Welcome, everyone. Here, every week there are at least 3 episodes. Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, and occasionally some extra episodes. Please like, comment, even an emoji, or become a member if you can. It helps me a lot. With the message delivered, let's get to the facts. February 1st, 2012 was just another normal day in that girl's life. At 18 years old, she had already worked at Subway and at the House of Harley Davidson. And now she was trying out a job as a cleaner at a coffee stand called Common Grounds. A place that offers customers passion in every cup. An invitation to savor the simple pleasures of life. Everything was calm in her life. To anyone who saw her behind the counter making coffee drinks and being friendly all the time, maybe they even thought she would settle into that more or less simple routine for a long time. But actually, she had already mapped out her life plan. First, she was going to enlist in the Navy as a nurse and build a successful career. Then, she would dedicate herself to caring for wild animals or horses. In other words, those jobs only provided the resources she needed to make her real dreams come true. But everything changed one night when she didn't return home. The girl was born and raised in Anchorage, Alaska. She was the daughter of James Jr. and Darlene. And she came into the world on August 30, 1993, in a very large family with 2 more sons, Travis and Alex, and 3 daughters, Tonya, Kaylee, and Mika. No information besides that, okay guys, except that in the family there were pets, Sheba and Mulisha. It's worth knowing that Samantha finished her studies and attended 2 high schools and continued on her path. But going back to the details of her life, she was dating a guy named Dwayne Tortolini too. She led a life full of activities, including fishing with her father, taking photographs, spending time with friends, camping, playing video games with her boyfriend Dwayne, and writing songs and poetry. A person who was completely radiant, infectious, the life of the party, you know, like people used to say back in the day. Anchorage, for those who don't know guys, has more than 200,000 inhabitants that accounts for about 40% of the entire population of the state of Alaska. Is it cold there? Absolutely. In the winter, average temperatures range from -30 to -2. In the summer, they vary between 11 and 18 degrees. Here, with temperatures from 11 to 18, I'm already wearing a jacket. For those guys over there, it's already time to hit the beach, but just wait and see. This information is important in this story, okay? Why? Let's go back to the timeline and you'll understand. When, on the night of February 1st, 2012, she didn't come home to her family's house, they all got very worried. No one could get in touch with her. No one knew where she was. Not her boyfriend, not her boss, not her best friend. So with no better option, they reported her missing to the police. And that decision on the part of the parents is always complicated, isn't it? It means admitting that something is really wrong. But on the other hand, it's also assumed that filing that report increases the chances of finding the missing person, right? But on the other hand, as I said, it means the situation is serious. And that by themselves, the family members are important, but sometimes they're unable to solve things on their own, right? And that's when you have to admit it may be a criminal case. But there were no important clues. Despite that, in the early stage of the investigation, the police suspected that Sam's boyfriend, that Dwayne guy, was involved in something. Why? Statistics, right? Pure and simple. We've already mentioned here on the channel that close to 90% of crimes committed against women involve men known to the victims. For example, relatives, boyfriends, husbands, exes, and so on. So based on this reality, a hypothesis was formulated that it was a crime of passion, which then led to actions by the detectives who examined Dwayne very closely. However, he soon presented a solid alibi, which allowed the authorities to look at other things and to focus on the surveillance footage from common grounds. Remember the coffee shop where Samantha worked? That's right. What interested the police now was the footage from the outside area of the coffee stand there. And look, I didn't mention it, but Samantha was working in a completely unsafe environment. She was alone at the place during the night shift. Her mother didn't like that at all and thought the situation was very dangerous for a girl who was only 18 years old, with the responsibility of closing the place every night. Another important detail here is that she didn't have her own vehicle. So, getting from home to work and from work to home depended on rides from her parents or her boyfriend. There was no mention of buses. So, we're left here not really knowing if getting to the coffee stand, the cafe, was easy or not using that means of transportation. In other words, it wasn't just us who thought that having a teenage girl alone in a cafe at night was reckless. Actually, it was kind of asking for trouble, wasn't it? Even if the service was like a drive-through, through the window. But you know how that situation was, right? A person with bad intentions would have everything they needed right there. In the footage, the detectives identified a man approaching the place late at night, already on February 1st, 2012. Apparently, he kidnapped her at gunpoint and forced her into a pickup truck. Then they drove off. But strangely, sometime later she returned. She went in and out of the coffee shop once again. And then she got into the vehicle again. Another bizarre event was that her boyfriend's car, hours later in another place, was broken into, and the belongings that were in the glove compartment were taken. I know that your minds, investigators, are already connecting all the dots, right? But hold on, we'll get there. We already know that coincidences don't exist, right? Not here, at least, not in true crime stories, but these elements seem random at first. And they confuse the investigators, but one more little thing happened, okay? Both her boyfriend and her boss received messages. Apparently, everything was fine. She had left voluntarily because she needed some time and would be back soon. Well, that same story we've already seen here, right? I'm fine, just disappearing for a bit. I'll be back soon. But days went by and there was no sign of her coming back or sending any more updates, and her cell phone remained turned off, making it impossible to track, for example. A really strange atmosphere hung over this investigation, a mystery that lasted more than 2 weeks until the silence was broken. On February 17, 2012, Samantha's boyfriend and her parents, James Jr. and Darlene, received a ransom demand. The message included a photo of Samantha with that day's newspaper in front of her. In kidnapping cases like this, that's considered proof of life for the victim. Well, the family was then asked to deposit $30,000 into Samantha's bank account. Once again, I'm sure that breathe. Guys, the amount for a ransom demand is relatively low, quote unquote, isn't it? But in this specific case, it was an amount that matched what the family had. Could someone have known? Why? If the kidnapper had demanded millions, the parents wouldn't have been able to pay. So it was kind of a move to find out that there would be a response. Look, the police were informed about this request and then set up a very specific different strategy that they, her parents, should deposit only $5,000 into Samantha's bank account. In other words, that they should make regular deposits, splitting up the payment. And that's what they did. They deposited $5,000 and hours later, a withdrawal of that amount happened at an ATM using the victim's own card, Samantha. Even though everyone was hopeful to find Samantha alive and well, it was a race against time, wasn't it? After the withdrawal, the police then tracked the ATM footage, but the man who took the money was wearing a mask and gloves, making him completely unrecognizable. In other words, up until that moment, the situation was of a very intelligent and organized criminal who was one step ahead of the investigators. The monitoring that the police carried out of the subsequent withdrawals ended up revealing a route, a journey through different cities in the United States, moving farther from Alaska and from the area around the coffee shop where Samantha worked and was abducted. And the journey included Texas, New Mexico, and Arizona. Quite a trek, isn't it? So to speak, man, a trip like that was cross-country. After analyzing the footage from the various ATMs, even though they couldn't identify the man, it was possible to see a vehicle in the background at the locations of those withdrawals. A white Ford Fox possibly connected to the suspect. In this case, it was the forensic work of cross-referencing traffic camera footage near the ATMs as well as near the coffee shop on February 1st. They were able to sort of track and determine that it was that car making those trips. I believe the detectives also investigated the cell phones, okay? Near the ATMs at the estimated times of the withdrawals. Well, finally, on March 13, 2012, about a month after the kidnapper made contact, a vehicle matching the description of that Ford Fox was located in Lufkin, Texas. The information about the suspicious vehicle and its possible location had been widely shared among the police officers. A Texan saw the vehicle parked at a motel near the highway, and when the driver got back on the road, the police officer followed him until he could pull him over for speeding. And during that routine stop, the police officer found that the driver of that Ford Fox was the suspect in the kidnapping of the girl from Alaska. Bingo! The driver was in possession of several incriminating pieces of evidence, including Samantha's cell phone and her bank card. He was then arrested and charged with the girl's kidnapping, and it didn't take long for him to describe in detail the crimes he had committed. And here we can take a deep breath because this account quickly goes from a criminal case to a horror story, okay? As for the victim, Samantha Koenig, she had been dead since the night of the kidnapping on February 1st. I'll give you the details in a moment, guys, but going back to those side notes I was making, right? Tell me in the comments at this point in the timeline, did you think Samantha was involved in her own kidnapping? It didn't seem that way when connecting the dots, right? As the story unfolded, it even seemed like it was a setup, knowing how much the family had. But just look at how there's such a cunning, macabre, evil mind behind all this. Speaking of how the kidnapping happened, Samantha was overpowered and taken by the attacker to the pickup truck I mentioned to you. Shortly after, he returned to the cafe wearing her blouse as a disguise. The cameras then recorded the image of someone entering the place. Everyone thought it was Samantha herself, but it was actually her kidnapper whose goal was to retrieve her cell phone. Maybe also to confuse the investigation by doing what I was provoking you here to make you think it was her. Here, dear abductees, you already understood what happened, right? The images sent that night to her parents and boyfriend did not show Samantha. It was the kidnapper, with the goal of buying time so the girl wouldn't be immediately reported as missing. He then took her to his own house, actually, to a shed in the backyard. There he abused Samantha, assaulted her, tortured her, and forced her to reveal the password to her bank account. However, there was another problem there. Samantha's bank card was in the glove compartment of Dwayne's vehicle, her boyfriend. I think everyone remembers that his car was broken into, right? In other words, that was the explanation for that inexplicable theft out of nowhere during the same period when Samantha was being kidnapped. The evil guy wanted the card, and the card with the password would give access to the girl's account and money which her parents deposited to get her back alive. After getting the information he wanted, the man strangled Samantha to death and left her lying on the floor. Her body was left there, abandoned. Then this man went into his house, checked if his girlfriend was sleeping, finished packing his suitcases, and left on vacation. He, Kimberly, who was his girlfriend and lived with him, and her 10-year-old daughter, the three of them took a taxi early the next morning and went to spend a few days somewhere sunnier and warmer than Alaska. Actually, they went on a peaceful cruise through the Caribbean. 2 weeks later, when he returned home, Samantha's body was there, in the same place, frozen by the cold. Faced with the need to dispose of the corpse, he had a very macabre idea. Using a hairdryer to warm the body, the man gradually thawed it. and then abused the corpse. After that bizarre, unimaginable sexual assault, he prepared the body to photograph it. You know that scene that opened the episode? That's right. This man named Israel Kiss combed and put makeup on his victim, Samantha Koenig. However, to make her look alive after 16 days, it took more than just makeup and combed hair. So Israel used fishing line and sewed her eyelids so that her eyes would stay open and she would look alive. On the internet, there are images from a documentary that recreated this horrible scene, but they say it's not the original photo. Israel's goal was to extort money from the Koenig family, which in fact he ended up achieving. And as has already been explained here, it was the repeated bank withdrawals he made, which were recorded by security cameras, that made his capture possible. Regarding the body after photographing it, Israel dismembered it and disposed of it in Lake Matanuska, north of Anchorage. 3 months later, the dismembered remains of Samantha Koenig were found by the FBI's Underwater Evidence Response and Search Team. The coroner's report later confirmed that the cause of death was strangulation. After his arrest, Israel confessed to being responsible for the murders of at least 10 more people. Victims spread across Washington, New York, Vermont, and Florida, including the following confirmed or strongly suspected victims: Bill and Lorraine Currier from Vermont in 2011, Deborah Feldman, who disappeared in New Jersey in 2009 and is considered a likely victim by investigators. In addition to an unknown number of homicides, the criminal was also linked to several bank robberies, rapes, and arson. At the end of May 2012, during his preliminary hearing, Israel tried to escape from the courtroom but was restrained with a stun gun. After his arrest, he was transferred to the Anchorage Correctional Complex in Alaska, where he awaited trial for the sexual assault and murder of Samantha Koenig, who was 18 years old and turned out to be his last victim. And just so you know, guys, Israel Kiss was originally from Utah. He claimed to have committed his first murder in 1998, shortly after enlisting in the United States Army. But he had no known history of violent crimes or sexual crimes, nothing like that. He was just a 34-year-old man from Alaska, owner of a construction company who, in everyone's eyes, led a simple and quiet life. It's also reported that he had never killed anyone so close to home before murdering Samantha. And unfortunately, many secrets were buried with Israel Kiss when he took his own life in prison before being tried. He used a razor blade to cut himself and then hanged himself with a sheet, and he left a sinister message. The drawing of 11 skulls made with his own blood, with the inscription, "We are one." Authorities suspect this was a reference to the total number of his victims. Yeah, guys, possibly the story of a miserable serial killer who couldn't face a trial to find out what his final fate would be. He preferred to bow out. I sincerely hope that his victims and he are in completely different places. And certainly not everything is as it seems, right? I wanted to put this timeline together differently so we can investigate the crime together. And I want to know here once again, who thought it had nothing to do with a serial killer and that maybe it was just a setup to get money? Leave a comment here for me. I really appreciate your company. A kiss from the redhead, and see you in the next episode.